Hi, I'm Shaylin Hayes from Misophonia International. Today I'm going to talk about how to cope if your loved one has misophonia. Now, this can be a family member, friend, sibling. It could even be a coworker who you get along with, but you're not sure how to really handle misophonia. The first thing people are often confronted with when they learn about misophonia is whether or not it's a real disorder. It is not currently in the DSM-5. However, those manuals take pretty much 15 years to change, and misophonia was only first recognized in 2001 by Doctors Jastreboff and Jastreboff. There have been studies since then, and research is actually picking up. So basically what we can confirm at this time is misophonia is a condition. It does exist. It does affect people. Of course, the specifics still need to be ironed out, like all new disorders. And what this really means is that there is no treatment. The basic research that exists right now, and I do want to specify I'm not a doctor, I am just an advocate, but what research does tell us is that misophonia is neurophysiological. So when people with misophonia have a trigger, they can't just get over a sound and they can't get used to something. Imagine lying in bed at night listening to the drip, drip, drip of a tap. For a normal person, they would eventually fall asleep. For misophonia, these sounds are causing a fight, flight, freeze reaction. And once they're in this heightened state of arousal, they don't naturally come down until they're out of this environment, which really means that exposure therapy is not going to work. If it did, our everyday lives are exposure therapy, basically. I think the first most important thing that people with misophonia and people trying to help someone with misophonia need to really realize is that exposure, the more it happens, these sounds and sometimes visuals, which I'll get into in another video, they accumulate. So the first couple triggers, you might react, you're upset, oh God, someone's whistling, you're panicked. But then the third or fourth time something happens, by then your state of arousal is so high that just calming down becomes that much harder. And sometimes people with misophonia in these situations, they just need to leave. The first few triggers they might be able to handle with headphones or earplugs, but eventually it can get to the point where the best cause of action is just to leave the room, calm down. And sometimes people can calm down and then come back and be okay. But this varies person to person. It varies on how someone handles stress. And since it's the nervous system, you really just have to work with your own body. I do want to talk specifically, though, to the people who have loved ones or, like I said, coworkers, friends that have misophonia. And I just want to first say, I know this is hard. I know it is so hard when someone is asking you constantly to stop making noises, to stop what you're doing. I actually have a neighbor who's upset because I apparently walk really loud, and I feel bad. I mean, I've tried to stop walking loud, but it's really hard when it's your home and you're just walking around. So sometimes it does feel like an attack at first. So the most important part of misophonia is that both parties, the person with misophonia and the person who is trying not to trigger them, they need to communicate. And there might be some horror stories where people joke about misophonia, they laugh, and they bully them or trigger them on purpose. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you probably aren't doing that. And maybe you do make the sound, but you're not doing it intentionally to hurt them. You don't realize how upsetting a trigger can be. So I am first going to say, when you're triggered, it feels painful. It is not an annoyance. Basically, how do I explain it? I'm already hyper aware of the world around me. Sitting here right now in my office, I could hear a car door across the street shut. If someone started whistling in the parking lot, I'd know. If the TV came on in the other room and had beeping noises, I would hear it immediately. And triggers vary person to person. Chewing is a very common one. Luckily for me, chewing is not a big trigger, but I am very triggered by whistling, tapping, Gum chewing, that's a big one, but that one impacts me more visually. Leg shaking visually, clicking, clacking noises, anything that's really abrasive. I am okay with soft sounds, so like certain high heels won't bother me so long as it's soft, or like gravel crunching, sounds like that. And I mean dogs barking, that bothers a lot of people. But some of these things are things that would heighten the arousal in most people. The difference with misophonia is we don't come back down as quickly. And we can learn to cope and try to come down from the trigger. But the important thing to realize is we can't stop ourselves from being triggered. We have to mitigate the response afterwards. So I always recommend people with misophonia come prepared. They have earplugs, headphones, anything that can really stop a complete breakdown. And when I say a complete breakdown, I mean more of a meltdown and shutdown, which are sensory terms. You don't want to get to the point where you have to lie in bed for a day because you honestly just can't handle it anymore. And a meltdown, like, imagine a toddler having a tantrum. I've actually gotten to that place as a grown adult from this. But the key thing to managing misophonia between people, when one has it and one doesn't, is communication. Every case of misophonia is different because different people have different life expectations. They have different lives. They live in, well, some live in the city, some live in apartments. Everybody has their own environment, and everybody has their own set of triggers and different relationships. Some places, people are scared to talk to their elders about the disorder because they think they're disrespecting them, and I don't want to minimize that at all. We all have different social expectations, and I completely understand that. But that's where communication comes in, and I think sharing resources, that's why I've been really passionate with Misophonia International, with sharing articles, with trying to get information out there. I think it's really important, the work that Duke University is doing. All of these resources are really good for sharing to people and saying, look, this is real, this exists, other people are talking about it. I think the provider network is important because it does show that there are doctors that are listening, that are willing to help patients. This is not a fake condition, this is real, this is harming people. Ironically, during this video, I can hear cars out in the parking lot, so if I seem a little spaced out, it's because I'm literally being triggered by making this, which is everyday life. But misophonia does change social events, so communication is important. When you work together, you can decide, okay, well, I want to watch a movie with you, but I won't eat popcorn because that's your trigger. Or instead of going to a restaurant, you maybe go to a park and hang out, or go shopping if you can handle stores. Each person has things they're comfortable with and things they're not comfortable with. It can help if you allow the person with misophonia to pick the restaurant or pick the social event, because then they can maintain control, and that's really helpful. I do want to talk about communication again, and it's really important not to have the conversation when the person with misophonia is triggered, because if you have that conversation while they're triggered, it's probably going to be a fight. Tensions are high on both sides, so I always talk about preventing. And of course, you cannot prevent the trigger, but you can prevent those meltdowns. So be prepared. Have headphones and earplugs ready. Ensure that the person with misophonia is able to escape. And don't make them feel bad if they leave an event early, and try to work together. Some events they can't leave, so even sometimes just squeezing their hand can be really helpful. I remember one time sitting in a movie theater and there was whistling on screen, and my boyfriend just held my hand. And honestly, that support, it was amazing because he couldn't help me, he couldn't change it, but I knew he was there. I knew that it was going to be okay. I was going to come out of this. And I mean, triggers aren't fatal. They feel like you're being suffocated, but you're not. And misophonia, like everything else, is just about communication. the person with misophonia can live a full life. They just need to adapt and find ways around it. And I mean, both parties just need to be easy on each other, compromise, realize that sometimes compromise isn't possible. And sometimes you just need a timeout from each other, and that's okay too. In a work environment and situation, this can be really hard, but oftentimes people look for accommodations like headphones, and if they can get that, that's amazing. It, of course, depends on the job environment, and everybody has a different life circumstance. For kids in school, I've heard stories of kids being able to leave the classroom if they had to. So just learn to adapt and communicate at every step of the way. This isn't a conversation you have once. This is a conversation that you can have numerous times. You might have to remind the person something's triggering them, but you have that initial conversation. You put the social structure in place that you're comfortable discussing it. And just realize that both parties are human. People mess up. That doesn't mean that you can't get through this. But coping with misophonia, both as the sufferer and the supporter, it's a day in, day out situation. There's no one quick fix. There's no Band-Aid. Socially, you need to work together in order to mitigate it, especially if you live with the person, and it can be hard. And basically, just learn to talk to each other, learn to be supportive, and sometimes you might need to walk away. Either party, if you can go for a drive or go in another room and just go to your own separate corners and calm down, that's okay. And if you can't eat family dinners together, so what? It's just dinner. You could have another family walk or something that doesn't have noise. Just find ways that work for you, adapt. You don't have to have somebody else's version of a coping plan. You don't have to have somebody else's version of a perfect life. If your partner snores and you want to sleep in another bedroom, so what? Give each other permission to work around it and support each other, whether it's a friendship, family member, or partner. Working together is the best way to mitigate this. Hope everybody's staying safe and had a good holiday, no matter what denomination they are, and let's just try to get through this one day at a time, whether it's COVID-19 that's going on right now or misophonia.